you're standing in the dim light of a cave. It's warm, with the faint smell of smoke curling through the air. But this isn't just any cave. This is a place where the first human beings, thousands of years ago, might have used a plant that's still sparking debates today: cannabis. Welcome to the ancient world, where humans were already tapping into the secrets of nature's plants long before you'd ever heard of a joint. It's hard to believe, but cannabis has been around for millennia. Picture this: a long time ago, in ancient civilizations, people were using cannabis not just for its psychoactive effects, but also for its medicinal, spiritual, and practical properties. It was probably a lot more integrated into daily life than you'd think, maybe even more than your Netflix subscription. While you're getting comfortable, take a second to like the video. Go ahead, do it if you like the journey I'm about to take you on, but only if you're here for the long ride. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love hearing about your local vibes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Cannabis, as we know it, traces its origins back over 12,000 years. Yep, you heard that right, 12,000 years. That's way before Instagram or even TikTok to keep you occupied. So what's a plant that old doing, and why is it still so central to modern conversations? It all started in places we might never have thought to look for it: China and Central Asia, to be exact. The earliest evidence suggests that cannabis was first cultivated in these regions, not for its mind-altering effects, though we'll get to that, but for its fibers. Hemp, made from cannabis, was used for ropes, sails, clothing, and even paper. Imagine that, a plant woven into the very fabric of civilization itself. And here's a fun twist: it's likely that ancient people didn't even know they were sitting on one of the earliest forms of social glue. They were just trying to get things done. Historians still argue whether cannabis was first used for medicinal purposes or simply because it was a handy, versatile plant. But what is known is that cannabis found its place in early human societies, not just as a material for making useful stuff, but as a ritual plant with mystical qualities. The earliest evidence of cannabis consumption, as in smoking it or ingesting it for its psychoactive effects, was found in the mountains of Central Asia, where nomadic tribes used it in spiritual ceremonies. Yes, you heard me right. Even back then, people were turning to the cannabis plant for something much more profound than just rolling a blunt and chilling out. They believed it could connect them to the divine. Cannabis started to spread beyond the borders of ancient China and into India, Persia, and eventually the rest of the known world. In India, for instance, cannabis became an integral part of Hindu rituals, where it was consumed in various forms as an offering to the gods. The sacred plant was even linked to Shiva, one of the most important deities in the Hindu pantheon. If you're trying to picture it, imagine an ancient fire pit surrounded by incense, thick smoke rising into the air. But of course, the smoke isn't just from the fire, it's coming from the cannabis, used in ceremony and prayer. These early uses were steeped in spirituality and divinity, not recreational fun. Now, before you jump to conclusions, here's a cheeky reality check. You probably wouldn't survive a single day in ancient times without some serious health benefits from cannabis. Don't worry, I'm not just talking about the high you might associate with it today. This plant wasn't just a social lubricant. The medicinal uses were vast, used to treat everything from headaches to digestive issues to even more complex ailments like anxiety. In fact, cannabis was considered so useful that it spread like wildfire across continents. By the time it reached the Middle East, it was being used for healing, textiles, and of course, sacred rituals. Take a moment to reflect on this. What if that ancient ritualistic use of cannabis in religious ceremonies wasn't just about the high? Historians and anthropologists debate whether ancient cultures were more in tune with the therapeutic and spiritual aspects of cannabis than we give them credit for. Could it be that their deeper connection with nature and spirituality made cannabis more of a bridge between the earthly and the divine, rather than just a plant for curing physical ailments? It's something to chew on as we keep moving through time. As we slide through these ancient timelines, you'll notice that the boundaries of the known world seem to shift with cannabis, just like it has shifted and shaped modern culture today. What started as a medicinal and ceremonial herb soon found its way into the hands of everyday people. But we'll get to that in the next part of this journey. For now, keep that image of ancient people, their smoke-filled rituals, and the mystical aura of the cannabis plant in your mind as we slowly roll into the next chapter. The world was just beginning to realize that cannabis wasn't just a plant. It was a bridge to something more, connecting not just ancient civilizations but the past with the present, the sacred with the ordinary. Remember, we're only scratching the surface. So, grab a cozy blanket, relax, and let's move forward through time in the next section. Let's pick up where we left off, drifting further back in time as you follow the thick, swirling smoke that lingers in ancient temples. The flicker of candlelight dances across the faces of priests and mystics, their chants filling the air. This is where cannabis, once an earthly gift, took on a divine role. Ancient civilizations didn't just use cannabis for textiles or medicinal purposes. They recognized it as a sacred plant, a key to the heavens, a gift from the gods themselves. You've just stepped into a world where the divine and the earthly collide, and the sacred herb wasn't just a casual commodity. It was treated as a divine tool, one that connected the human realm to the celestial one. Imagine the flickering firelight and the rhythmic chanting of ancient priests, who, with the help of cannabis, would feel as though they could commune directly with deities. You can almost feel the weight of the smoke in the air, carrying with it both sacred significance and a transformative power. And you probably wouldn't survive a single night without some sort of divine intervention if you were back in those days. But before you start panicking about being sent to an ancient temple with no Wi-Fi, just remember that cannabis was far more than a recreational drug. It was considered a gift from gods like Shiva in Hindu culture. Cannabis wasn't just about getting high. It was about being spiritually elevated and accessing a realm beyond the physical world, a belief that permeated ancient traditions. This sacred connection may have been one of the reasons why cannabis held such deep significance across many cultures. Take a second to hit that like button, just a casual click if you're vibing with the journey so far, but only if you're here to go deep into history. And let me know where you're watching from. Is it a peaceful evening where you are, or are you buzzing with energy as you listen? As cannabis made its way into ancient India, it wasn't just a casual thing. In fact, it was a ritualistic element in many Hindu ceremonies. The consumption of cannabis, often in the form of bhang, was seen as a way to honor and connect with the divine. It's hard to picture, but back in the day, those who participated in these ceremonies would have likely felt themselves drift away from reality, entering a mystical state. In temples, sacred ceremonies would be held, and cannabis became part of the process, a physical manifestation of offering and devotion. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of cannabis in spiritual and medicinal practices was a way of increasing ritual efficacy, or if it had more to do with simply altering consciousness. There are those who believe it was the key to unlocking greater wisdom, while others argue that the plant's benefits were likely more grounded in medicinal uses. Was the use of cannabis simply another way to connect with the divine, or did it have therapeutic value that helped people make it through the day-to-day grind? It's an interesting thought, especially when you consider the wisdom of ancient peoples. Maybe they had a better understanding of nature's gifts than we give them credit for. But India wasn't the only place that treated cannabis as sacred. In Persia, the Zoroastrian faith also used cannabis in rituals and ceremonies. The Persians were known to have a rich history with cannabis, using it for both its psychoactive properties and medicinal benefits. Imagine, if you will, the vast, open desert stretching out before you. In the midst of it, you see a fire burning, surrounded by individuals who are using cannabis to enhance their spiritual connection. For these people, cannabis wasn't just a plant. It was a bridge to a higher understanding, a way of communing with the universe itself. As cannabis spread further into the ancient world, it wasn't confined to the East. The Greeks and Romans, ever the explorers, found their way into the fold of cannabis usage. However, their approach was slightly different. They didn't incorporate it into their spiritual ceremonies quite like the Indian or Persian cultures. Instead, cannabis made its way into the healing arts, and soon enough, physicians were incorporating it into their treatments. Yet, the Greek and Roman fascination with the plant wasn't purely medicinal. It also had a role in the cultural and social fabric of the times. In Greece, a few prominent physicians like Dioscorides and Galen wrote about cannabis and its potential medicinal uses. Cannabis was even prescribed as a treatment for various ailments, including pain, inflammation, and even as a way to manage certain neurological conditions. But unlike the spiritual reverence seen in the East, the Greeks and Romans treated cannabis as a tool for healing, a functional, practical solution in a world filled with chronic pain and suffering. And as we move toward the West, remember that this was also a time when cannabis wasn't just used in medicine, it was entering into the everyday lives of common folk. People weren't just popping pills, they were reaching for plants and herbs in a much more natural, holistic way. Still, whether used as a spiritual conduit or as a remedy, cannabis was a part of ancient life across the globe, providing comfort, connection, and even a sense of purpose to those who turned to it. Now let's slow things down a bit. Close your eyes, or if you're not already in a comfy position, get settled in. You're heading into the next part of this journey where we explore even deeper, diving into how the use of cannabis evolved from sacred rites to everyday healing. Keep that image of ancient rituals in your mind, those sacred spaces, the flickering light, and the smoke lifting up to the heavens. And just like that, the story of cannabis continues. It's as if you're stepping out of a fog of incense and smoke into the very heart of ancient China. The dense forests stretch out in front of you, and in the distance, the sound of the river winding its way through the mountains fills the air. Here, cannabis is woven into the fabric of life, not only as a spiritual symbol but also as a medicinal marvel, an early prescription for what ails you. It's not just for ceremonies anymore. It's for healing, for comfort, for survival. You probably won't survive a cold winter in ancient China without some form of cannabis to ease the chills, but don't worry, you won't need to time travel for that. Cannabis was one of the first plants in history to be used for medicine in a way that we can still relate to today. Its long history in China is well documented, stretching back to at least 2700 BC, when Emperor Shennong, the legendary herbalist and medicine man, is said to have discovered cannabis as one of the 365 herbs in his pharmacopoeia. That's right. This emperor wasn't just ruling the land. He was also making sure his people had the right herbs for every possible ailment. Imagine a royal herbalist with a vast knowledge of plants, constantly mixing concoctions that might have made modern-day pharmacists raise an eyebrow. But here's the thing, cannabis wasn't just for relieving pain or helping with sleep. It was also seen as a remedy for ailments like malaria, gout, and even constipation. Imagine living in a world where plants, not pills, were your go-to medicine. No pharmacy runs, no waiting in line at the doctor's office, just nature's own remedies at your fingertips. In fact, ancient Chinese texts, such as the Shennong Ben Chao Jing, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, note that cannabis was valued not only for its medicinal qualities but also for its ability to calm the mind and body. So, it wasn't all just about getting high. It was about bringing balance, healing, and peace to the body and soul. Historians still argue whether cannabis in ancient China was used more for its psychoactive effects or its medicinal properties. Was it the relaxing influence of the plant that made it so widely used? Or was it the deeper therapeutic benefits that people were really after? Some believe that ancient Chinese medical practitioners viewed cannabis as a tool for treating the mind just as much as the body. If you think about it, cannabis was probably the closest thing to a natural cure-all. Back then, no wonder it found its way into many ancient homes. As you step further into the mystical world of ancient China, let's shift the focus to the medicinal uses of cannabis that would have made the ancient practitioners proud. One of the plant's most important uses was as an anesthetic. In a time when surgery was primitive at best, cannabis was used to numb pain during operations. Imagine the first time a surgeon administered cannabis to dull the pain of surgery. Not the kind of procedure you'd want to experience, but the fact that cannabis was playing such a vital role speaks volumes about its versatility. But it wasn't just the Chinese who embraced cannabis for its medicinal properties. Moving westward, we encounter another culture that embraced cannabis as a key to physical and mental well-being, ancient India. If you've ever wondered where the idea of cannabis as a spiritual and medicinal plant really took off, India was likely one of the earliest adopters. In ancient Hindu texts, cannabis was praised as a gift from the gods, something to be consumed during religious ceremonies and also used for medicinal purposes. Much like in China, it was used to ease pain, settle the mind, and treat a variety of ailments. Cannabis even found its way into the preparation of bang, a drink made from cannabis leaves that was consumed during sacred festivals. Now, before you start thinking about sipping on your own bang and hitting subscribe, go ahead. If you're enjoying this journey, let's take a moment to really reflect on the spread of cannabis across ancient civilizations. It's fascinating to consider that, in both China and India, cannabis was seen as a tool not just for personal relaxation, but for healing and spiritual growth. It wasn't simply a plant to be passed around at parties. It was a revered resource used to maintain health, peace, and well-being. And as we continue our journey, you'll see that this reverence for cannabis traveled with the plant as it spread across the globe, touching other cultures and finding its place in rituals, healing practices, and even daily life. Historians still debate how the widespread use of cannabis in ancient China and India might have influenced the use of cannabis in other parts of the world. Did these regions set a precedent for how the rest of the world would view cannabis in the centuries to come? Were their uses medicinal and spiritual, or was the psychoactive nature of the plant something that transcended the boundaries of practicality? Some scholars argue that the use of cannabis in these regions paved the way for the plant's spread, while others believe it remained more isolated. Either way, the ancient world was beginning to unlock the secrets of cannabis, laying the groundwork for the complex relationships we have with the plant today. So as you stand there, surrounded by the ancient landscapes of China and India, imagine what it must have been like to live in a world where cannabis wasn't just a recreational indulgence but a sacred, healing plant with centuries of tradition behind it. The mysteries surrounding cannabis would continue to evolve, stretching from ancient temples to the bustling markets of ancient trade routes, and eventually, all the way to the Western world. But we'll have to wait for the next section to uncover just how cannabis made its way to the rest of the globe. For now, let the calming imagery of ancient Chinese medicine and Indian rituals settle into your mind as we continue this incredible journey. You've just traveled across ancient India and China, but now, picture yourself stepping into the grand marble halls of ancient Greece. The sun blazes down, the faint aroma of herbs fills the air, and philosophers are engaged in their deep, intellectual discussions. This isn't just a place of knowledge, it's a crossroads where medical practices meet philosophy, and where cannabis, known by a different name, finds its place in both medicine and society. You probably won't survive a day in ancient Greece without someone recommending a little cannabis for whatever ails you. That's right. The Greeks didn't shy away from using plants like cannabis for medicinal purposes. As you stroll through the bustling marketplaces and open-air forums, you'd hear people speaking of remedies, and cannabis wasn't excluded from this. While the Greeks didn't use cannabis quite the same way it was used in sacred ceremonies in India or China, they certainly knew its value. The earliest recorded use of cannabis in ancient Greece is attributed to the physician and botanist, Dioscorides. His famous work De Materia Medica, circa 1st century CE, was a comprehensive guide to the medicinal plants known to the Greeks, and guess what? Cannabis was on the list. In his writings, Dioscorides described cannabis as a treatment for a variety of ailments, including pain and inflammation. For him, cannabis wasn't something you just roll up and smoke for fun. No, it was something much more useful. It was a remedy, something to soothe the body's ailments. Imagine the relief of knowing that the same plant, in some form, would help you with aches and pains, much like it does today. Historians still argue whether the Greeks were more focused on cannabis as a psychoactive substance or as a medicinal one. Some believe the Greeks understood its calming and therapeutic properties and incorporated it into their medical practices primarily for pain management. Others argue that its recreational use was still prevalent, just not in the same way we see today. Was it all about the medicine, or did the Greeks indulge in a bit of relaxation too? That's something we may never fully know. Still, we do know that cannabis made its way into their medical texts, a sign that even in the ancient world, people saw its potential as more than just a plant. Beyond the medical applications, cannabis also found its way into ancient Greek cultural practices, even if it wasn't elevated to the divine status that it had in the East. While you weren't likely to see the Greeks offering cannabis to their gods in the same way the Hindus did with bhang, the Greeks still had an appreciation for its healing power. But it didn't stop there. Greek soldiers even used cannabis as a form of treatment for wounds. It was applied topically as a balm, likely mixed with other herbs, to soothe injuries. Cannabis, it turns out, wasn't just a casual herb for the Greeks. It was a warrior's ally, helping ease pain after battle and heal the body. And then, as we float through the remnants of ancient Greek culture, let's take a quick stop in ancient Rome. While the Romans were known for their military prowess and architectural feats, they too weren't strangers to the medicinal powers of cannabis. Like the Greeks before them, Roman physicians, including Galen, acknowledged the plant's usefulness for a variety of ailments. It was used for its anti-inflammatory properties and as a pain reliever, especially for conditions like arthritis and wounds. But the Romans, with their penchant for innovation, weren't just content with cannabis in its raw form. They also sought to refine its uses. Roman healers would often create tinctures or poultices to maximize its effectiveness. But let's not get too caught up in the world of healing, because here's a fun twist. While the Greeks and Romans were busy with their herbal concoctions, cannabis had a quieter, more rebellious life brewing in the background. You probably won't believe this, but cannabis also became a bit of a party plant. In ancient Rome, there's evidence that cannabis was used in certain communal settings, like gatherings and festivals, where people would partake in what was essentially an early form of indulgence. There's even speculation that the ancient Romans may have used cannabis in ways similar to modern-day recreational use, though it was certainly more subdued. Now, imagine yourself back in those times. You've just had a long day at work, or a day of intellectual debate, for you ancient philosophers, and now it's time for a little relaxation. What's the answer? Cannabis. It may not have been quite the same as today's leisure time, but it's clear that the ancient Romans and Greeks were comfortable using cannabis for a variety of reasons, both medicinal and recreational. A little puff here and there for the pain, or a calming balm to soothe those tired muscles. Cannabis was a truly versatile plant. But here's a thought. Historians still argue whether cannabis was as popular as other plants in the ancient Mediterranean or whether it was a more niche herb, used by those in the know. Could it be that cannabis was more of an undercurrent, a secret remedy for the intellectuals and healers, or was it part of the everyday Roman life in ways we just don't see in the historical record? And as you reflect on these ancient worlds, imagine what it must have been like to walk the streets of Greece or Rome, knowing that cannabis was an integral part of both medicinal practices and cultural rituals. It wasn't just about getting high. It was a plant that carried with it a deep history of healing, relaxation, and even celebration. As you settle into the soothing rhythm of this journey, we'll move further in time, where cannabis will start taking on new forms and new roles, until it reaches a point in history where its popularity, medicinal uses, and cultural significance will take another dramatic turn. But for now, let the imagery of ancient Greece and Rome linger in your mind, those bustling streets, the temples, the medicines, and the whispered secrets of a plant that could do it all. Hold on to that feeling as we head toward the next chapter in cannabis's long and winding history. Now, imagine yourself walking down a narrow cobbled street in medieval Europe. The hustle and bustle of a busy marketplace fills the air, as traders shout over each other, offering their wares. You can smell the rich aroma of fresh bread, and in the background, the faint but distinct scent of herbs and potions wafts from the local apothecary's stall. Here, in the midst of these bustling streets, cannabis is quietly continuing its journey, not just as a medicinal herb, but as a staple in the treatment of ailments, providing a form of comfort to those who are suffering. You probably wouldn't survive medieval Europe without cannabis to help ease the aches and pains of daily life. The Middle Ages weren't exactly the most comfortable period in history, and without modern medicine, people often had to rely on what was available to them: plants, potions, and the knowledge passed down through generations. Cannabis, with its potent healing properties, fit right into this world. Cannabis wasn't a stranger to medieval apothecaries. In fact, during this time, it was widely used for medicinal purposes. Written records from the period, including works like the Hortus Sanitatis, the Garden of Health, which was first published in 1491, mention cannabis as one of the key herbs used to treat a variety of conditions, from headaches to fever to pain relief. The plant was seen as a miracle cure for many ailments, and it was often used in the form of tinctures, salves, or simply as a smoked remedy. Imagine the apothecary, tucked away in the corner of the medieval marketplace, blending cannabis with other herbs to make healing concoctions, possibly offering them to peasants and lords alike. Historians still argue whether cannabis was used widely by the common folk, or whether it remained primarily in the hands of the elite and educated. Was it the peasants who sought the soothing relief of cannabis, or were they more likely to turn to simpler remedies from their gardens? Some scholars believe that it was primarily the medical professionals and alchemists who truly understood cannabis's power, while others argue that its use was widespread across all levels of society. One thing is clear: cannabis played an essential role in the world of medieval medicine. But let's not just think about pain relief for a second. What about its spiritual significance during the Middle Ages? You might think the Middle Ages were a time when people were mostly concerned with religion, war, and survival, and you'd be right. But cannabis still made an appearance in the spiritual practices of some, especially in the mystical circles of the time. Monks and mystics were known to use various herbs in their rituals, and cannabis was no exception. While it wasn't widespread, there were certain orders of monks who believed in the healing properties of cannabis, incorporating it into their prayers and healing rites. It wasn't just about getting high. It was about enhancing one's connection to the divine, calming the mind, and achieving a state of spiritual clarity. That's right, folks. Back then, cannabis wasn't just about easing pain. It had a spiritual purpose, helping some individuals reach a state of heightened awareness. If you were a monk sitting quietly in a monastery, performing rituals and prayer, cannabis might just have been part of your journey into enlightenment. It's amazing how the roles of plants can change, isn't it? From ancient spiritual ceremonies to medieval monasteries, cannabis had its place in history as something more than just a medicinal herb. Now, before you get too lost in the quiet halls of ancient monasteries, let's turn our attention to the wider European scene. Cannabis was also used in the production of textiles during this period. In the Middle Ages, hemp, which comes from cannabis, was an essential part of everyday life, particularly in the making of ropes, sails, and clothing. It's hard to imagine the extent to which hemp was integrated into medieval life. The very fabric of society, literally, was woven from hemp fibers. Sailors relied on hemp sails for their ships, and workers in various industries depended on hemp ropes to secure goods and aid in construction. It's safe to say that cannabis's legacy as a useful plant extended far beyond its medicinal or spiritual uses. Hemp was the backbone of many industries. Historians still argue whether the shift from medicinal cannabis to hemp as a vital industrial resource during the Middle Ages marked a turning point in the plant's significance. Was this the moment when cannabis became more of an industrial material, relegating its medicinal and spiritual uses to the background? Or did it continue to serve both functions, simultaneously helping to build ships and heal bodies? Some experts suggest that by the time the Middle Ages rolled around, the plant's medicinal properties were still highly valued but were overshadowed by its industrial uses. However, others argue that cannabis continued to be a key ingredient in many remedies, even as its industrial applications began to take center stage. As you reflect on medieval Europe, consider how cannabis was quietly integrated into life at every level, whether as a remedy for the sick, a spiritual aid for the devout, or a practical material for building the world around them. Despite the rise of other plants, cannabis continued to thrive in the background, keeping its place as a versatile and invaluable resource. Now, as we transition from the Middle Ages, let's think about how cannabis's role would begin to shift once again. As we move into the Renaissance and beyond, cannabis would eventually enter a new phase in its journey, one that would see its place in the world of healing and industry begin to morph into something different. Hold that thought as we move into the next chapter, where cannabis will continue to evolve in surprising ways. For now, let the imagery of the medieval world, the herbalists, the monks, the marketplaces, and the ships, settle into your mind as we prepare for the next stage in cannabis's story. As the centuries unfold, you find yourself stepping out of the dark alleys of medieval Europe and into the dawning light of the New World. The bustling markets and towering castles give way to the vast, untamed lands of the Americas. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of the coast, gazing out over a new world of possibility. The scent of salt water fills the air, and in the distance, you can just make out the silhouettes of ships on the horizon. This is where cannabis takes on a whole new life. Its journey to the Americas, a new chapter in its evolution. You probably won't survive much longer without a solid dose of cannabis if you were back in this period. The journey was long, the conditions harsh, and the settlers faced the brutal challenges of survival in a new world. But cannabis was here, quietly following the trail of colonization, and not just for medicinal use. It would play a role in the development of the New World's industries and social structures, just like it had in Europe. As the first European settlers began their voyages across the Atlantic, cannabis, or more specifically hemp, made the journey with them. It was one of the earliest crops introduced to the Americas, and for good reason. Its versatility was unparalleled. Hemp became an essential crop in the growing colonies, used for everything from ropes to sails to clothing. The New World was built on hemp just as much as it was built on the backs of the people who crossed the ocean. Cannabis's industrial uses were solidified in early America. In fact, by the 1600s, hemp was so valuable that the Virginia colony actually made it illegal not to grow hemp. Yes, you read that right. The demand for hemp was so great that the government encouraged, and even mandated, its cultivation. Imagine walking down a busy colonial street, where hemp fibers were woven into just about every fabric you could imagine. Hemp was everywhere, on the ships that sailed the seas, in the ropes used to secure the cargo, and in the clothing worn by colonists. Hemp was so integral to the economy that it was often used as currency. Without it, the colonies might not have survived the early years of settlement. Historians still debate whether the cultivation of hemp was as central to the early economy of the Americas as we've come to believe. Some argue that while hemp was certainly valuable, it was still just one piece of a much larger economic picture. Others point to the fact that hemp was considered one of the first cash crops in the United States, suggesting that it was a far more critical part of early American commerce than we realize. Either way, one thing is clear: cannabis, specifically hemp, played a key role in the success and growth of the colonies. But let's shift gears a little and focus on something that you might find surprising. Cannabis wasn't just about industry and trade in early America. It was also about survival. The early settlers relied on cannabis for its medicinal properties as much as for its industrial applications. Cannabinoids, the active compounds found in cannabis, were used to treat a variety of ailments, from pain and nausea to digestive issues and anxiety. Cannabis was part of the settlers' medical arsenal, something they could turn to when traditional medicines weren't available or didn't work. Imagine a colonial doctor's cabinet filled with jars of herbs, cannabis among them, ready to be brewed into a tincture or made into a salve to heal a wound. For those tough frontier folks, it wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving in a hostile, unfamiliar land. But even as cannabis was flourishing in the New World, things were starting to change. As we move into the 19th century, the growing popularity of cannabis began to attract the attention of those in power. There was a shift in attitude toward the plant. Despite its widespread use, cannabis began to be seen in a less favorable light. Its connection with the labor force, especially in the hands of immigrants and marginalized communities, sparked fears. And here's where things take an unexpected turn in our journey. The very plant that had helped people survive the harsh realities of the New World began to face increasing scrutiny. Historians still argue about when and why attitudes toward cannabis shifted so dramatically in the U.S. Was it a product of the increasing racism and fear of immigrant communities? Or did the shift happen because of the growing political power of prohibitionist movements? Some argue that cannabis, which was once seen as a valuable part of everyday life, became a symbol of social disorder and rebellion by the end of the 19th century. The plant's association with marginalized communities, particularly Mexican immigrants who used it recreationally, played a major role in the negative shift in public perception. The story of cannabis's journey in America is far from a straightforward one, and this change in attitude would only set the stage for the political and cultural battles to come. Imagine the irony. What was once a staple in everyday life, a plant that helped build the very foundation of the New World, was now being demonized and criminalized. How did a plant so integral to early American survival become something that was feared and outlawed in just a few hundred years? It's a question that has many answers, but the history of cannabis in early America shows just how deeply intertwined the plant's legacy is with social and political forces. As we prepare to leave the 19th century behind, it's important to keep the image of the New World in your mind: the crops, the settlements, and the healing power of cannabis. This was a time when cannabis was firmly planted in the fabric of American society, both as a necessity and a part of everyday life. But it was also a time when the plant was beginning to evolve, setting the stage for the cultural upheavals of the 20th century. So, keep that thought in mind as we head into the next chapter, where the plant's role will continue to change, marking the beginning of its controversial path into modern-day culture. For now, let the image of early America's hemp-filled streets, its medical applications, and its crucial role in survival linger in your mind, as we venture forward into the next stage of cannabis's long history. You're stepping into the 20th century now, and things are about to get intense. The world is changing fast: world wars, industrialization, and shifting social landscapes. And as cannabis finds its way into the cultural undercurrent, it's also slowly being pushed into the shadows. Imagine the tension in the air. The country is evolving, but not everyone's on the same page about how things should go. The political scene is heating up, and with it, cannabis's status is about to shift dramatically from an accepted part of society to an object of fear, control, and outright prohibition. You probably won't survive this chapter without a deep dive into cannabis's rocky relationship with the government, and the laws that would soon shape its fate. In the early 1900s, cannabis was still widely used in both medical and recreational contexts. In fact, it wasn't just a fringe thing. It was incorporated into tonics, elixirs, and medicines that were readily available in drugstores. You could walk into any corner pharmacy and find tinctures containing cannabis, used to treat ailments from pain to anxiety to insomnia. The plant's medical benefits were still widely acknowledged, and it was found in everything from cough syrups to beauty creams. But it wouldn't last. The 20th century ushered in a wave of fear-driven politics, and cannabis was soon caught in the crossfire. The tipping point came in the 1930s, during the administration of Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Anslinger was a key figure in the campaign to criminalize cannabis. He and his allies used fear-mongering tactics to demonize the plant, associating it with Mexican immigrants, jazz musicians, and the growing African American communities in urban areas. Anslinger and others painted cannabis as a dangerous drug that led to violence, madness, and according to some, the breakdown of society itself. Historians still debate whether Anslinger's anti-cannabis crusade was rooted in genuine concern about public safety, or if it was more about racism and political control. Some believe his campaign was largely racially motivated, while others argue it was part of a broader, fear-driven push to regulate substances that were seen as a threat to the social order. Was it really about public health, or did it tap into the racial and cultural tensions of the time? One thing is clear: cannabis was now seen as a threat, and its legal status would soon reflect that. By 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, effectively making cannabis illegal in the United States. It wasn't just a ban on recreational use, it severely restricted the medical and industrial use of cannabis as well. Suddenly, the same plant that had been a part of American life for centuries was now criminalized. This marked the beginning of cannabis's long and tumultuous relationship with the law. As cannabis was being pushed out of the mainstream, a new counterculture was beginning to take shape. Enter the 1960s, the age of rebellion, the rise of the hippie movement, and the spread of radical new ideas. This was the period when cannabis became a symbol of defiance against authority, a countercultural badge of honor for those who rejected the norms of society. Hippies, artists, and musicians began to embrace cannabis as a symbol of freedom, creativity, and rebellion. This cultural shift wasn't just about smoking a joint to relax. It was about rejecting the rigid, establishment values of the time. Cannabis became central to the 1960s counterculture, from the music of artists like Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead to the protests against the Vietnam War. Cannabis, in many ways, became the unofficial drug of the peace movement, symbolizing a desire for social change, personal freedom, and a new way of life. Historians still argue whether the popularization of cannabis in the 1960s helped to propel the counterculture or if the counterculture would have existed without cannabis. Was the widespread use of cannabis among young people in the 1960s a sign of broader societal shifts, or did the plant itself spark these changes? Some believe the plant was merely a catalyst for an already inevitable social revolution, while others argue that cannabis played a much more active role in challenging societal norms and pushing for greater acceptance of alternative lifestyles. Imagine being a young person in the 1960s, sitting in a smoky room with friends, listening to music that challenged the establishment, and feeling part of a larger movement that was redefining what it meant to live in a free society. You probably won't survive the cultural shifts without the rebellious spirit of the times, and cannabis was, without a doubt, a key part of that rebellion. But just as cannabis was gaining popularity among the youth, the political backlash intensified. In the 1970s, the government ramped up the war on drugs, and cannabis became even more heavily criminalized. The Nixon administration's push for a drug-free society led to an increased focus on cracking down on marijuana use, especially in minority communities. By the time the Controlled Substances Act was passed in 1970, cannabis was classified as a Schedule I drug, the highest level of restriction. This move cemented cannabis's status as a dangerous, illegal substance, regardless of its long history of medicinal and cultural use. You can feel the tension in the air. Cannabis is on the defensive, its reputation tarnished, its future uncertain. But even as the plant was being demonized, people were still using it. The 1960s and 1970s may have marked the height of cannabis's counterculture status, but it also planted the seeds for what was to come, a slow, steady movement toward reevaluating cannabis's role in society, especially as its medicinal benefits began to make a comeback. Historians still argue whether the war on drugs truly succeeded in eradicating cannabis use or whether it simply pushed it underground. Did criminalizing cannabis actually lead to a reduction in its use, or did it make people more determined to fight for its acceptance? Some argue that the war on drugs created a stigma around cannabis that only fueled its allure, while others believe it was a necessary step in controlling what was perceived as a societal threat. As you drift through the haze of the 1960s and 1970s, take a moment to reflect on how cannabis went from being a widely accepted plant to being vilified, criminalized, and used as a political tool. The story of cannabis is one of constant change, but also one of resilience. And as we move further into the next chapters, we'll see how this controversial plant would rise once again, starting with the medical marijuana movement. For now, let the image of the 1960s, those smoky rooms, the protests, and the defiance, linger in your mind as we continue on this journey through the winding path of cannabis's history. You're walking into the 1990s, a time when the political landscape is shifting once again. The streets feel different now, the air electric with change. The echoes of the 1960s and 1970s counterculture are still reverberating, but now, something unexpected is happening. Cannabis, which had been pushed into the shadows for decades, is slowly but surely making its comeback. This time, though, it's not about rebellion or defiance. It's about something more grounded, healing. Imagine the scene, a person, sitting in a doctor's office in California, nervously discussing their options for pain relief. The doctor looks at them with understanding. No more judgment. No more stigma. Cannabis is back, but this time, it's not just a plant for getting high. It's a legitimate medical treatment, being prescribed to patients for its therapeutic benefits. The 1990s are about to set the stage for one of the most significant shifts in the history of cannabis. You probably won't survive this chapter without hearing the story of how cannabis went from criminalized contraband to a recognized form of medicine in the United States. The key moment came in 1996, when California passed Proposition 215, making it the first state in the U.S. to legalize medical marijuana. This was a monumental shift, a turning point where the tides of public opinion began to change. The people had spoken. They wanted access to cannabis for medical reasons, and now the law was catching up. The passage of Proposition 215 marked the beginning of a slow but steady movement toward cannabis legalization, one that would spread to other states and eventually to the rest of the world. Historians still debate whether the medical marijuana movement in the 1990s was purely driven by the health benefits of cannabis, or whether it was fueled by the growing push for personal freedom and civil rights. Some argue that the medical marijuana movement was primarily about health and giving people access to alternative treatments, while others believe it was deeply intertwined with the larger fight for individual rights and liberties. Was this just a health issue, or was it part of a larger cultural shift toward questioning the status quo? Either way, the medical marijuana movement was about more than just one plant. It was about the right to choose your own medicine. The breakthrough came when the scientific community started taking a closer look at cannabis and its potential for treating various medical conditions. The 1980s and 1990s saw a growing body of research showing the therapeutic properties of cannabinoids, the active compounds in cannabis. People were using cannabis to treat everything from chronic pain to nausea, from chemotherapy to neurological disorders like epilepsy. But it wasn't until the 1990s, when scientists began studying the endocannabinoid system, the body's natural system that interacts with cannabinoids, that the medical community started to take cannabis seriously as a treatment option. Think about it, for decades, cannabis had been viewed as a recreational drug with little scientific merit. But now, scientists were discovering that it could help alleviate pain, reduce inflammation, and even treat conditions like PTSD. The discovery of the endocannabinoid system in the early 1990s was a game-changer. It was like finding the missing link between cannabis and the body. Suddenly, cannabis wasn't just some plant people smoked for fun. It was a therapeutic powerhouse that could help manage pain and improve quality of life. Still, cannabis's medical potential was not widely accepted by all. The stigma surrounding marijuana use remained strong, especially among conservative lawmakers and the older generation. Critics argued that legalizing medical marijuana would open the floodgates to recreational use and lead to an increase in drug abuse. Others questioned whether the medical benefits were real or just anecdotal. But as more states passed medical marijuana laws, and more patients began to share their success stories, the tides slowly started to turn. Imagine, if you will, a patient in one of these early medical marijuana states, feeling like they're finally getting a chance to heal. After years of struggling with a debilitating illness, they find relief in something as simple as a plant. It's not just about the physical relief. It's about regaining a sense of control over their life. The 1990s marked the beginning of a shift toward acceptance and understanding. The once taboo plant was beginning to be recognized as a legitimate form of medicine, one that could truly make a difference in people's lives. As we move forward from the 1990s, the ripple effect of medical marijuana's legalization would be felt worldwide. Other countries began to take notice, and the idea that cannabis could be more than just a recreational drug started to gain traction on a global scale. But while the medical marijuana movement was gaining ground in the US, cannabis was still largely illegal in many parts of the world. It wasn't until the 2000s and 2010s that more countries began to take the plunge and legalize medical cannabis, setting the stage for the larger cannabis movement we see today. Historians still debate whether the 1990s medical marijuana movement was a key moment in the larger global shift toward cannabis legalization. Did the success of Proposition 215 set the stage for global acceptance, or did it simply serve as a localized catalyst for change? Some argue that it was the US that led the way, while others point to countries like Canada and Israel, where research into cannabis's medical uses was already ahead of the curve. So, as you relax and drift into the next stage of this journey, let the image of those early medical marijuana patients in California linger in your mind. They were the pioneers of a new era, one where cannabis was finally recognized for what it truly was, not just a plant for getting high, but a tool for healing. It's a powerful story of resilience and transformation, and it's only just beginning. Now, let's shift focus, as we move toward the moment when cannabis finally started to shed its stigma and enter mainstream culture in a way we've never seen before. The future of cannabis looks brighter than ever. Stay with me as we dive deeper into the changing landscape of cannabis culture and its growing acceptance across the globe. It's the turn of the 21st century, and you find yourself standing at a crossroads in cannabis history. The air is thick with anticipation, and the world is watching. The 1990s set the stage, but now, it's time for cannabis to step fully into the spotlight, not just as a medical treatment, but as a force to be reckoned with. Picture this: a growing number of states in the US are decriminalizing marijuana, more patients are benefiting from medical cannabis, and the winds of change are blowing across borders, spreading cannabis culture and reform around the globe. Things are finally shifting in the way the world sees cannabis. But it's not all smooth sailing. You probably won't survive this chapter without seeing just how far cannabis has come, and how far it still has to go. By the early 2000s, the medical marijuana movement was gaining momentum, but cannabis was still largely illegal in most parts of the world. Yet, the tide was starting to turn. In 2001, Canada made a bold move and became one of the first countries to legalize medical marijuana. Canada's decision set a powerful example for the rest of the world, and soon, other countries began looking at their cannabis laws more closely. What was once seen as a taboo substance was beginning to be acknowledged as a legitimate treatment option. But here's where the tension lies: even as medical marijuana was gaining ground, cannabis was still facing an uphill battle, especially in the United States. The federal government continued to classify cannabis as a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, which made it illegal at the national level. Despite the growing number of states that had legalized medical marijuana, the federal government's stance was clear: cannabis was still considered a dangerous substance with no accepted medical use. This created a strange legal limbo, where state and federal laws were at odds, and patients, providers, and advocates had to navigate a confusing and often hostile legal landscape. It was during this time that a major shift occurred in the way people viewed cannabis. The stigma surrounding marijuana use, fueled by decades of fear, misinformation, and prohibition, began to crack. As medical cannabis became more widely available and patients began to share their success stories, public perception of cannabis began to change. People started to realize that cannabis wasn't just a drug for hippies or outlaws. It was a legitimate medicine, helping people cope with everything from chronic pain to anxiety to terminal illnesses. Historians still argue whether the legalization of medical marijuana in the 2000s was the true turning point in cannabis's cultural acceptance, or if the wave of cannabis legalization in the 2010s truly marked the beginning of mainstream cannabis culture. Was it the rise of medical cannabis that broke the stigma, or was it the new generation of cannabis enthusiasts who were more open-minded? Either way, it's clear that cannabis was on the path to transformation. And then, something monumental happened in 2012. In a move that shocked the nation, Colorado and Washington became the first two states in the U.S. to fully legalize cannabis for recreational use. This was a game-changer, a moment when cannabis was no longer just for medical patients or counterculture activists. It had entered the mainstream, and people were lining up to buy it, not for pain relief or to get medicated, but for the sheer enjoyment of it. This was cannabis's coming-out party, and the world was paying attention. The shift was not just in the laws, but in the culture. Cannabis began to be marketed and consumed in ways that made it feel more like wine or craft beer than an illicit substance. As dispensaries began to pop up in legal states, they were often designed to be welcoming, professional spaces, more like high-end retail stores than shady back-alley operations. The stigma of the stoner was starting to fade away, replaced by a more sophisticated image of cannabis consumers as connoisseurs, exploring the various strains and products available. But even as cannabis culture began to grow, there were still challenges to face. In many parts of the US and around the world, cannabis was still illegal, and the battles for full legalization were just beginning. Cannabis advocates had to continue fighting for equal rights, fair treatment, and the opportunity to regulate cannabis in a way that benefited consumers and communities alike. At the same time, medical cannabis continued to gain support, and more states followed in the footsteps of California, Colorado, and Washington. By 2016, more than half of U.S. states had legalized medical marijuana, and recreational use was becoming more accepted. The global landscape was also changing. Countries like Uruguay had become the first nation in the world to fully legalize cannabis, and other countries, such as Canada, Mexico, and parts of Europe, were considering similar moves. But here's the thing: while cannabis's cultural and legal transformation was in full swing, the plant was still fighting for full acceptance. There were still those who viewed cannabis with suspicion, equating it to a dangerous drug that could harm society. Critics argued that legalizing cannabis would lead to increased drug use, addiction, and societal collapse. But as time passed, more research was conducted, and more evidence emerged showing that cannabis could be a force for good, helping people with chronic conditions, providing relief to cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy, and even reducing opioid use in certain communities. Historians still debate whether the legalizing states, especially in the U.S., were driven by an increasing body of scientific evidence or by the desire for tax revenue and economic growth. Some argue that the movement was primarily fueled by evidence showing cannabis's medicinal benefits, while others contend that the financial incentives of legalizing cannabis, such as job creation, tourism, and tax revenue, played a huge role. One thing is for sure: the cannabis market was starting to look more like a legitimate industry than ever before. Imagine standing in one of those early legal dispensaries, surrounded by rows of cannabis products, edibles, oils, topicals, tinctures, and of course, flowers. It feels like stepping into the future. You're not just walking into a place where people are getting high, you're entering a space where the product is treated with respect, where consumers are educated about what they're buying, and where cannabis is no longer a taboo subject. This is the new face of cannabis, and it's a far cry from the illicit, underground drug it once was. So, as you reflect on the 2010s and the moment when cannabis truly became a part of the mainstream culture, think about how far it's come. From being an outlaw plant in the early 20th century to being fully embraced by both the medical community and consumers worldwide, cannabis has come full circle. But the journey doesn't stop here. In the next section, we'll see how cannabis continues to push boundaries, both in terms of its legal status and its place in global culture. So stay with me as we dive deeper into the continuing evolution of cannabis culture. The story is far from over. Now, imagine stepping into the present day, where cannabis isn't just a symbol of rebellion or a medical treatment, but a booming global industry. The world is buzzing with excitement as more and more countries, cities, and states are embracing cannabis in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. You're witnessing the birth of an entirely new economy, where cannabis is not just for smokers and patients, but for investors, entrepreneurs, and even those seeking wellness in new, innovative ways. You probably won't survive this chapter without realizing just how quickly cannabis has become a cultural and economic juggernaut. In 2021, the legal cannabis industry in the United States alone was valued at over $20 billion, and the global cannabis market is projected to continue growing, reaching new heights in the coming years. From dispensaries that look like upscale shops to cannabis-infused products on store shelves across the world, cannabis has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry that's no longer hiding in the shadows. So, what happened? How did we go from the war on drugs and widespread criminalization to cannabis becoming one of the fastest-growing industries in the world? The answer lies in a combination of factors, but at the heart of it all is a shift in public perception. Cannabis has gone from being demonized as a dangerous drug to being embraced for its medicinal benefits, its economic potential, and even its cultural significance. The change didn't happen overnight, but as more states and countries legalized cannabis, more people started to view it as a legitimate, safe, and even beneficial substance. Take a moment to think about what it's like now to walk into a legal cannabis dispensary. The shelves are stocked with a variety of products: flower, edibles, oils, tinctures, topicals, and even beverages. The atmosphere is clean, welcoming, and professional. Gone are the days of shady, back alley dealings. Now, cannabis has entered the mainstream in a way that's just as sophisticated as buying wine or craft beer. The stigma surrounding cannabis use has faded, and it's now a part of the wellness and lifestyle conversation in ways that were once unthinkable. Historians still debate whether this rapid growth in the cannabis industry was primarily driven by changing laws or by a cultural shift toward broader acceptance. Some argue that the legalization of cannabis in various states and countries was a response to growing demand, while others suggest that the cultural and societal changes of the 2010s, particularly in terms of wellness, personal freedom, and medical marijuana use, paved the way for cannabis to gain legal and social acceptance. Either way, the fact remains that cannabis is now being consumed, marketed, and celebrated in ways that reflect its growing legitimacy. In the midst of this new cannabis landscape, wellness has become a significant part of the narrative. Many people are turning to cannabis for its potential to alleviate stress, anxiety, pain, and sleep disorders. Cannabis-infused products are making their way into the wellness space, from CBD oil to bath bombs, skin creams, and even yoga classes. The health and wellness market, now intertwined with cannabis, has redefined the way we think about this plant, not just as a substance for getting high, but as a natural remedy for a variety of modern ailments. Think about it, you've got people turning to cannabis not for recreational use, but as a holistic approach to managing their well-being. That's a far cry from the days when cannabis was associated only with counterculture. Today, it's not unusual to find professional athletes, doctors, and even senior citizens turning to cannabis for its therapeutic properties. It's not about getting stoned anymore. It's about using cannabis as part of a balanced, health-conscious lifestyle. But just as cannabis is becoming a cultural and economic powerhouse, it's not without its challenges. The issue of legalization remains a heated topic in many parts of the world, and the struggle for full decriminalization continues in countries where cannabis is still illegal. While many U.S. states have embraced cannabis for both medical and recreational use, the federal government remains hesitant to change its stance. And globally, while countries like Canada and Uruguay have legalized cannabis, many others are still grappling with the question of whether to follow suit. Despite the growing global acceptance of cannabis, its legal status remains inconsistent, creating a patchwork of laws and regulations that vary widely depending on where you are. Some countries have fully embraced cannabis, allowing it for both medical and recreational use, while others continue to impose harsh penalties for possession or use. The battle for legalization is far from over, and as cannabis continues to be a divisive issue, there are still many hurdles to overcome before it becomes fully accepted in every corner of the globe. But let's shift gears and look at the cultural impact of cannabis. The way it's portrayed in the media, in movies, in music, cannabis is no longer just a fringe element. It's woven into the fabric of mainstream culture. Celebrities and influencers have played a huge role in normalizing cannabis use, with public figures endorsing cannabis products, promoting wellness benefits, and even launching their own cannabis brands. Celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Martha Stewart, and even professional athletes have helped elevate cannabis's cultural status, turning it into a symbol of wealth, success, and sophistication. Historians still argue whether the increasing normalization of cannabis in popular culture is a sign of broader societal shifts, or simply a marketing strategy by the cannabis industry. Is cannabis truly becoming a symbol of progressive change, or is it just another product to be consumed? Some say that the cultural normalization of cannabis reflects a growing movement toward personal freedom and open-mindedness, while others argue that it's simply the commodification of a once illicit substance. As you reflect on the cultural journey of cannabis, think about where it's headed. The normalization of cannabis, paired with the rise of cannabis-infused wellness products and the continued fight for legalization, signals a future where cannabis may not just be accepted, it may become a cornerstone of modern wellness culture. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at the scientific and health benefits of cannabis, exploring how research is continuing to uncover new and exciting possibilities. As cannabis continues to transform from a controversial plant into a celebrated medicinal and cultural tool, the story is far from finished. Stick with me as we journey into the next phase of cannabis's fascinating evolution. Now, Imagine stepping into the present day, where cannabis isn't just a symbol of rebellion or a medical treatment, but a booming global industry. The world is buzzing with excitement as more and more countries, cities, and states are embracing cannabis in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. You're witnessing the birth of an entirely new economy, where cannabis is not just for smokers and patients, but for investors, entrepreneurs, and even those seeking wellness in new, innovative ways. You probably won't survive this chapter without realizing just how quickly cannabis has become a cultural and economic juggernaut. In 2021, the legal cannabis industry in the United States alone was valued at over $20 billion, and the global cannabis market is projected to continue growing, reaching new heights in the coming years. From dispensaries that look like upscale shops to cannabis-infused products on store shelves across the world, cannabis has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry that's no longer hiding in the shadows. So, what happened? How did we go from the war on drugs and widespread criminalization to cannabis becoming one of the fastest-growing industries in the world? The answer lies in a combination of factors, but at the heart of it all is a shift in public perception. Cannabis has gone from being demonized as a dangerous drug to being embraced for its medicinal benefits, its economic potential, and even its cultural significance. The change didn't happen overnight, but as more states and countries legalized cannabis, more people started to view it as a legitimate, safe, and even beneficial substance. Take a moment to think about what it's like now to walk into a legal cannabis dispensary. The shelves are stocked with a variety of products: flower, edibles, oils, tinctures, topicals, and even beverages. The atmosphere is clean, welcoming, and professional. Gone are the days of shady, back-alley dealings. Now, cannabis has entered the mainstream in a way that's just as sophisticated as buying wine or craft beer. The stigma surrounding cannabis use has faded, and it's now a part of the wellness and lifestyle conversation in ways that were once unthinkable. Historians still debate whether this rapid growth in the cannabis industry was primarily driven by changing laws or by a cultural shift toward broader acceptance. Some argue that the legalization of cannabis in various states and countries was a response to growing demand, while others suggest that the cultural and societal changes of the 2010s, particularly in terms of wellness, personal freedom, and medical marijuana use, paved the way for cannabis to gain legal and social acceptance. Either way, the fact remains that cannabis is now being consumed, marketed, and celebrated in ways that reflect its growing legitimacy. In the midst of this new cannabis landscape, wellness has become a significant part of the narrative. Many people are turning to cannabis for its potential to alleviate stress, anxiety, pain, and sleep disorders. Cannabis-infused products are making their way into the wellness space, from CBD oil to bath bombs, skin creams, and even yoga classes. The health and wellness market, now intertwined with cannabis, has redefined the way we think about this plant, not just as a substance for getting high, but as a natural remedy for a variety of modern ailments. Think about it, you've got people turning to cannabis not for recreational use, but as a holistic approach to managing their well-being. That's a far cry from the days when cannabis was associated only with counterculture. Today, it's not unusual to find professional athletes, doctors, and even senior citizens turning to cannabis for its therapeutic properties. It's not about getting stoned anymore. It's about using cannabis as part of a balanced, health-conscious lifestyle. But just as cannabis is becoming a cultural and economic powerhouse, it's not without its challenges. The issue of legalization remains a heated topic in many parts of the world, and the struggle for full decriminalization continues in countries where cannabis is still illegal. While many U.S. states have embraced cannabis for both medical and recreational use, the federal government remains hesitant to change its stance. And globally, while countries like Canada and Uruguay have legalized cannabis, many others are still grappling with the question of whether to follow suit. Despite the growing global acceptance of cannabis, its legal status remains inconsistent, creating a patchwork of laws and regulations that vary widely depending on where you are. Some countries have fully embraced cannabis, allowing it for both medical and recreational use, while others continue to impose harsh penalties for possession or use. The battle for legalization is far from over, and as cannabis continues to be a divisive issue, there are still many hurdles to overcome before it becomes fully accepted in every corner of the globe. But let's shift gears and look at the cultural impact of cannabis. The way it's portrayed in the media, in movies, in music, cannabis is no longer just a fringe element. It's woven into the fabric of mainstream culture. Celebrities and influencers have played a huge role in normalizing cannabis use, with public figures endorsing cannabis products, promoting wellness benefits, and even launching their own cannabis brands. Celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Martha Stewart, and even professional athletes have helped elevate cannabis's cultural status, turning it into a symbol of wealth, success, and sophistication. Historians still argue whether the increasing normalization of cannabis in popular culture is a sign of broader societal shifts, or simply a marketing strategy by the cannabis industry. Is cannabis truly becoming a symbol of progressive change, or is it just another product to be consumed? Some say that the cultural normalization of cannabis reflects a growing movement toward personal freedom and open-mindedness, while others argue that it's simply the commodification of a once illicit substance. As you reflect on the cultural journey of cannabis, think about where it's headed. The normalization of cannabis, paired with the rise of cannabis-infused wellness products and the continued fight for legalization, signals a future where cannabis may not just be accepted, it may become a cornerstone of modern wellness culture. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at the scientific and health benefits of cannabis, exploring how research is continuing to uncover new and exciting possibilities. As cannabis continues to transform from a controversial plant into a celebrated medicinal and cultural tool, the story is far from finished. Stick with me as we journey into the next phase of cannabis's fascinating evolution. You step into a world where cannabis is no longer a controversial topic, but rather a symbol of cultural change and acceptance. Imagine this, a vibrant city street in the 2020s, bustling with life. Bright dispensaries line the road, their windows filled with sleek packaging and a variety of cannabis products. People from all walks of life, professionals in suits, students in hoodies, grandparents with walkers, are all browsing these shops as if they're picking out their next favorite bottle of wine. The plant that was once considered a dangerous vice has now entered the mainstream, and its influence stretches far beyond just health and medicine. Cannabis is having its moment in the cultural spotlight, and it's here to stay. You probably won't survive this chapter without noticing how far cannabis has come in terms of cultural integration. No longer seen as a fringe or rebellious act, cannabis consumption has gone through a remarkable transformation. It's no longer just about getting high, it's about wellness, relaxation, creativity, and even socializing. Cannabis culture has shifted from underground gatherings and rebellious counterculture to become a part of the everyday landscape. Think about how normal it's become to see cannabis being used in movies, television shows, and social media content. It's no longer taboo, it's cool, trendy, and even sophisticated. But how did we get from reefer madness to the modern cannabis renaissance? Part of this shift is due to the growing visibility and acceptance of cannabis consumers in the public eye. Celebrities, athletes, and influencers are helping to normalize cannabis use. Public figures like Snoop Dogg, Martha Stewart, and even NBA players like Kevin Durant and Stephen Curry have endorsed cannabis, launching their own brands and opening up conversations about its benefits. This has played a huge role in transforming cannabis from something seen as dangerous into something more akin to fine wine or artisanal beer, something to be enjoyed responsibly, appreciated for its quality, and celebrated for its cultural value. But it's not just about the stars. Everyday consumers are reshaping what cannabis culture looks like. No longer associated only with rebellious youth, cannabis has attracted a diverse demographic of people. People from different generations, backgrounds, and walks of life are turning to cannabis for a variety of reasons. For some, it's about relaxation and unwinding after a long day. For others, it's a way to manage chronic conditions, anxiety, or sleep issues. As cannabis continues to become more accessible, it's being consumed in a variety of forms, from edibles and oils to topicals and beverages. It's not just about smoking anymore, It's about integrating cannabis into everyday life in a multitude of ways. Cannabis is no longer just a plant, it's become a lifestyle, a cultural identity, and even an economic engine. With the rise of cannabis brands, wellness products, and recreational dispensaries, an entire industry has emerged around cannabis. The cannabis industry is creating jobs, generating tax revenue, and providing new economic opportunities in ways that were previously unimaginable. In places where cannabis has been legalized, dispensaries have become part of the local economy, bringing new business, tourism, and community benefits. The industry is growing fast, and its economic impact continues to expand as more states and countries embrace legalization. Historians still debate whether this shift in cannabis culture is a direct result of the legalization movement, or if it's part of a larger societal transformation. Some argue that cannabis's rise in popularity is simply the result of increased access and changing laws, while others suggest it's part of a broader cultural evolution, where society is becoming more open-minded and accepting of alternative lifestyles and personal freedoms. Whatever the reason, one thing is certain: cannabis has entered the cultural mainstream in ways that no one could have predicted just a few decades ago. One area where cannabis is making waves is in the realm of food and beverages. Cannabis-infused edibles are now a staple in many legal markets, with products ranging from gummies and chocolates to teas and even cocktails. Cannabis chefs are even offering fine dining experiences, crafting dishes that integrate cannabis's rich flavors and therapeutic benefits. Imagine sitting down at a sleek restaurant, the soft lighting casting a calming glow, while a chef presents you with a dish infused with cannabis, carefully prepared, with the perfect balance of flavor and effect. This sophisticated approach to cannabis is part of a growing movement that's redefining how we think about the plant, not just as a recreational substance, but as an ingredient in gourmet experiences. As cannabis becomes more accepted, there's also a growing focus on its environmental impact. Many cannabis growers are turning to sustainable and organic farming practices, ensuring that cannabis production doesn't harm the environment. The rise of eco-conscious cannabis farming reflects a broader trend in the wellness and sustainability movements. Consumers are not just interested in the quality of the cannabis they're buying, they want to know that it's grown with respect for the planet. This focus on sustainability and ethical sourcing is reshaping the cannabis industry, making it more aligned with broader cultural values around health, wellness, and the environment. The legal cannabis movement has also had a significant impact on the criminal justice system. With legalization, there has been a growing push for criminal justice reform, especially concerning people who were disproportionately impacted by marijuana-related arrests and convictions. In the U.S., millions of people have had their lives upended by marijuana charges, and as cannabis becomes legal in more places, there's an increasing effort to expunge the records of those affected. States like California and Illinois have implemented automatic expungement programs, allowing individuals who were convicted of low-level cannabis offenses to clear their records and move forward with their lives. Historians and activists still argue whether legalization is enough to correct the social injustices tied to cannabis prohibition. While expungement and criminal justice reform are important steps, some believe that the wealth generated by the cannabis industry should be reinvested into communities most affected by the war on drugs. Others argue that it's still too early to tell whether legalization will truly undo the damage done by decades of criminalization. What's clear, however, is that cannabis legalization is helping to spark larger conversations about racial justice and equity in the criminal justice system. As you think about the growing mainstream acceptance of cannabis, consider how its cultural significance has evolved. From being a taboo substance to becoming a symbol of personal freedom, wellness, and even social justice, cannabis has taken on a role in society that is as complex as the plant itself. What started as a fringe element, tied to counterculture movements, has blossomed into a thriving global industry, influencing everything from fashion to food to policy. As you look ahead, you can't help but feel the electric charge of possibility in the air. The story of cannabis is far from over, and its future is just as dynamic and unpredictable as its past. While the plant has already come a long way, from its ancient beginnings as a sacred herb to its controversial criminalization, and now its rapid rise as a mainstream cultural and medicinal force. What's next in store for cannabis? You probably won't survive this chapter without contemplating how cannabis will continue to reshape society in the coming decades. We're standing at a crossroads once again, and the future of cannabis could lead us down several different paths. Will it continue to gain acceptance and legitimacy, or will there be new challenges that arise? One thing is certain, cannabis is on the brink of something big. Whether it's through further expansion of legal markets, breakthroughs in medical research, or deeper integration into the fabric of culture, cannabis's journey is far from finished. For one, the global push for cannabis legalization continues to grow. Countries around the world are following in the footsteps of Canada and Uruguay, with more nations examining the potential benefits of cannabis legalization, not just for recreational use, but for medicinal purposes as well. The conversation has shifted from whether cannabis should be legal to how best to regulate and manage it. This growing global acceptance is leading to the development of a worldwide cannabis industry. Imagine this: a few years from now, you could be traveling across the globe, and wherever you are, whether it's in Europe, South America, or even parts of Asia, you'll see cannabis dispensaries offering products tailored to local tastes and preferences. While cannabis culture in the US might have set the tone, other regions are developing their own unique approaches to cannabis use, regulation, and consumption. In countries like Canada and Mexico, cannabis is already a legal and thriving industry, and in places like Israel, cutting-edge research is pushing the boundaries of what we know about cannabis's medical benefits. Historians still debate whether the global cannabis revolution is truly a movement of progress or a product of shifting political and economic forces. Some argue that the legalization of cannabis is part of a broader global trend toward individual rights and freedoms, while others see it as a reaction to economic pressures, with governments looking for new sources of revenue in times of financial uncertainty. Regardless of the driving forces, it's clear that the momentum for cannabis legalization is only going to grow, and with it, new opportunities for innovation, job creation, and economic development. But as cannabis enters the mainstream, there are challenges on the horizon. One of the biggest issues is the ongoing battle for federal legalization in places like the United States. While states like California, Colorado, and New York have embraced cannabis, the federal government still classifies it as a Schedule I controlled substance. This creates an inconsistent and complicated legal landscape, with state legal cannabis businesses facing obstacles like banking restrictions, limited access to federal research funding, and barriers to interstate commerce. The question is, will federal legalization happen in the near future? Many advocates are optimistic, citing the growing support for cannabis reform and the increasing pressure from both the public and lawmakers to end prohibition. In the U.S., cannabis advocates are pushing for federal decriminalization and the passage of bills like the MORE Act, which would remove cannabis from the federal controlled substances list. However, political gridlock, competing interests, and concerns about potential negative consequences mean that cannabis legalization at the federal level is still a work in progress. Another major question for the future of cannabis is its role in the world of medical science. As cannabis research continues to expand, we are likely to see more breakthrough discoveries in the treatment of various medical conditions. While we already know that cannabis is effective for pain management, anxiety, and conditions like epilepsy, researchers are only scratching the surface when it comes to understanding the plant's full therapeutic potential. There's still a long way to go before cannabis is fully integrated into mainstream healthcare. For instance, there's growing interest in using cannabis to treat conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and other neurodegenerative disorders. Preliminary studies have shown that certain compounds in cannabis, particularly CBD, may have neuroprotective properties that could slow the progression of these diseases. If future research supports these findings, cannabis could become a cornerstone of treatment for conditions that currently have no cure. But for this to happen, it will take years of rigorous clinical trials, research funding, and political will to fully integrate cannabis into the healthcare system. Historians and scientists still debate whether cannabis will ever reach the level of acceptance and integration into mainstream healthcare that other pharmaceuticals have. Some argue that cannabis's stigma will continue to limit its potential, while others believe that scientific breakthroughs and increasing public support will pave the way for cannabis to become a standard treatment option in the future. As we continue to explore cannabis's therapeutic benefits, there's no doubt that the plant's medical potential is only beginning to be understood. The future of cannabis also includes the evolution of its cultural status. While cannabis has already made its mark on mainstream media, entertainment, and even social justice movements, there's still much more to come. The next few decades could see a deeper integration of cannabis into lifestyle brands, with more products emerging that cater to the wellness, beauty, and self-care markets. We could see cannabis-infused skincare, haircare, and beauty products become as ubiquitous as any other skincare line. Furthermore, the cannabis industry could evolve into a hub for environmental sustainability, with more companies focusing on eco-friendly farming practices, energy-efficient production, and sustainable packaging. With the growing interest in environmental responsibility, the cannabis industry has the potential to set new standards for sustainability and innovation. Historians still argue whether the future of cannabis will be one of mass acceptance or continued controversy. Will cannabis continue to break down barriers, or will it face new obstacles as it enters the mainstream? Will it become a permanent fixture in global wellness and health, or will its potential be sidelined by political and cultural resistance? As you look ahead, it's clear that the journey of cannabis is far from over. We're standing at the beginning of a new chapter, where cannabis is poised to play a major role in society, not just as a medicine, but as a cultural and economic force with far-reaching implications. The question now is, where will this journey take us? What's next in the evolution of cannabis, and how will it continue to shape the future? In the next section, we'll delve into some of the more intriguing questions about cannabis's future, from its impact on global health systems to the ways it might influence the next generation of consumers. Get ready for a look into the possibilities that lie ahead in the exciting, ever-changing world of cannabis. The story is far from over, and the best is yet to come. As we look ahead, cannabis isn't just making waves in legal spaces, it's carving out a place in the future of medicine, culture, and even global policy. The potential for cannabis to reshape our world is vast, and it's happening right before our eyes. Imagine standing at the edge of a new frontier, where cannabis is no longer relegated to the shadows but embraced as a powerful, multifaceted tool for healing, personal well-being, and economic growth. The next chapters of cannabis's story are still being written, and the future is ripe with possibility. You probably won't survive this chapter without realizing that we're entering uncharted territory. While cannabis has already come a long way, it's still on a trajectory that could radically change not just how we use the plant, but how we think about wellness, healthcare, and even the global economy. With cannabis now being legalized in many places, we're seeing a cultural revolution, and in many ways, it's just the beginning. The shift from criminalization to full acceptance is a huge leap, but the journey forward will be even more fascinating. As we enter the future, one of the most exciting prospects for cannabis is its role in global health systems. We've already seen its immense potential for treating conditions like chronic pain, anxiety, and insomnia, but what about its ability to address some of the world's most pressing health challenges? In places like Canada, where cannabis is fully legal, the healthcare system is beginning to treat cannabis as a legitimate, essential treatment option. However, what about the rest of the world? How will the global healthcare community embrace cannabis as part of the broader medical landscape? This shift is already happening. For instance, as research into cannabis's therapeutic effects continues to expand, we're seeing more international studies that support its use for a variety of serious conditions. Cancer patients, for example, have found that cannabis helps manage the debilitating symptoms of chemotherapy, offering relief from nausea, pain, and lack of appetite. And the promise doesn't stop there. Cannabis's ability to treat neurological disorders, like epilepsy and Parkinson's disease, is drawing attention from the scientific community. Some researchers believe that cannabis could be a game-changer in the fight against neurodegenerative diseases, offering neuroprotective benefits that may slow down conditions that have no cure. Cannabis's potential to address mental health challenges is also something to consider in the future. anxiety, depression, and PTSD are on the rise worldwide, and cannabis could offer a natural, non-addictive alternative to prescription medications. While the effects of cannabis on mental health are still being studied, early research suggests that certain cannabinoids, especially CBD, may help regulate mood, reduce stress, and even act as an antidepressant. With mental health challenges becoming more recognized as an urgent issue globally, cannabis could play a central role in addressing the crisis in a way that's both effective and accessible. Of course, as we look toward a future of cannabis-infused healthcare, there are still hurdles to overcome. Many governments, especially in conservative regions, continue to view cannabis with suspicion, often associating it with recreational use and illegal behavior. The stigma that cannabis once carried still lingers, which means that cannabis's full integration into healthcare systems around the world will take time. Legalization on a global scale is a long-term process, and there will be debates, struggles, and setbacks along the way. However, the momentum is undeniable, and each step forward brings us closer to a future where cannabis is not just accepted but embraced as part of mainstream medicine. Another huge aspect of cannabis's future is its environmental impact. The cannabis industry is growing rapidly, and as it expands, there's increasing pressure to ensure that its growth is sustainable. Cannabis cultivation, like any other form of agriculture, requires resources, water, land, and energy. But with sustainability at the forefront of global concerns, there's a growing movement toward eco-friendly practices in cannabis farming. By adopting organic and regenerative farming techniques, cannabis growers can reduce their environmental footprint and contribute to a more sustainable future. Imagine a future where cannabis is grown with the same environmental care and attention as organic fruits and vegetables. Cannabis could become a model for sustainable agriculture, offering an example of how to grow valuable crops in a way that benefits both the environment and society. With the cannabis industry poised to expand globally, there's an incredible opportunity to create a standard for environmentally responsible farming practices that could influence other industries as well. Additionally, the future of cannabis isn't just about medicine or agriculture, it's also about its role in the economy. The cannabis industry is one of the fastest growing sectors globally, with billions of dollars in revenue already being generated by legal markets in the US, Canada, and other countries. But what if the full economic potential of cannabis hasn't even been realized yet? As more states and countries legalize cannabis, the industry will continue to grow exponentially, creating new jobs, businesses, and opportunities. Think about the sheer scope of the cannabis economy. Farmers, cultivators, retailers, researchers, chefs, and wellness experts are all involved in the industry in some way. And as cannabis becomes more widely accepted, new industries will emerge to meet consumer demand. From cannabis-infused beverages to beauty products to wearable wellness technology that tracks cannabis consumption and effects, the future of cannabis in the economy looks incredibly promising. But with all this growth, it's important to think about how we can ensure that the benefits of cannabis legalization are distributed fairly. As the industry grows, there's a risk that it could become dominated by large corporations, leaving out smaller, marginalized communities that were historically impacted by the war on drugs. This is where social equity programs come into play. As cannabis legalization spreads, there will be an increasing push to ensure that people from communities disproportionately affected by cannabis prohibition have the opportunity to participate in the industry, whether through business ownership, job creation, or the reinvestment of tax revenue into those communities. Historians still debate whether cannabis legalization will truly be an economic boon for all, or whether it will reinforce existing inequalities. Will the industry be built on principles of fairness and equity, or will it mirror the inequalities seen in other industries? One thing is certain, the future of cannabis is not just about profit, it's about creating an industry that benefits everyone, from the people who grow the plants to the communities that need the support. As you stand at the crossroads of cannabis's future, think about the possibilities that lie ahead. The path forward is filled with potential, but it's also lined with challenges. Cannabis is poised to become a global force for good, whether in healthcare, agriculture, the economy, or social justice, but we must be mindful of the responsibility that comes with this power. The future of cannabis will be shaped by the decisions we make today, and as we continue to unlock the plant's potential, we must ensure that its benefits are shared by all. In the final section, we'll take a reflective look at the legacy of cannabis and the journey it's taken throughout history. How has it transformed our culture, our health, and our world? And what can we learn from the incredible story of cannabis as we move forward? Let's wrap up this remarkable journey together. As we draw to the final chapter of cannabis's remarkable journey, imagine standing on the summit of a mountain, looking back at the path you've traveled. The sun sets behind you, casting a warm glow over the terrain you've covered, from ancient rituals to centuries of prohibition, from medical breakthroughs to full-blown cultural revolutions. Cannabis has come a long way. It has shaped civilizations, sparked political movements, and transformed from a stigmatized, illegal substance to a globally recognized and celebrated plant. You probably won't survive this chapter without reflecting on the significance of this journey. The story of cannabis is more than just the story of a plant. It's a story of human perseverance, cultural evolution, and the ongoing battle for justice. It's the tale of a substance that has been misunderstood, maligned, and criminalized, but one that continues to rise above, claiming its rightful place in the world. And as we stand on the edge of a new era, it's worth asking, what will the legacy of cannabis be, not just in terms of its economic or medicinal potential, but in its broader cultural and social impact? Looking back, the history of cannabis tells a powerful story of human connection. Whether it was used in ancient spiritual practices in India, treated as a medicinal marvel in Greece and China, or cultivated for industrial purposes in the New World, cannabis has been more than just a plant. It has been a tool for survival, healing, and expression. Its ability to transcend borders, cultures, and centuries speaks to its inherent significance in human history. As cannabis continues to spread across the globe, it connects us to the past while propelling us into the future. One of the most important lessons we can learn from cannabis's journey is the power of challenging societal norms. For centuries, cannabis was demonized, criminalized, and misunderstood. But through perseverance, activism, and education, it has slowly but surely broken free from the chains of stigma. The legalization movements, the fight for medical cannabis, and the push for social equity are all part of a larger narrative, a narrative that reflects the broader human struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. Cannabis's story mirrors the ongoing fight for personal rights, social justice, and equality that is still unfolding today. As cannabis continues to evolve, its impact on global health systems is becoming undeniable. The growing body of research showing cannabis's potential to treat everything from chronic pain to neurological disorders to mental health issues signals a new era of medicine, one that embraces natural, holistic treatments alongside conventional ones. It's a future where cannabis could become a staple in medical care, helping to alleviate suffering and improve quality of life for millions. And while we still have a long way to go in terms of full scientific understanding and regulatory approval, the momentum is undeniable. Cannabis is moving from the margins of the healthcare system to the forefront, and its potential is only beginning to be realized. But cannabis's legacy won't be confined to the medical field. As the plant's role in wellness culture continues to grow, it's becoming clear that cannabis is no longer just for pain relief or relaxation. It's becoming a symbol of conscious living, mindfulness, and personal empowerment. The wellness industry is embracing cannabis as a tool for self-care, with products that promote balance, relaxation, and holistic health. From CBD-infused skincare to cannabis-infused yoga classes, cannabis is being integrated into our daily lives in ways that reflect a shift toward wellness-focused living. The future of cannabis also holds great promise in the realm of sustainability. As the cannabis industry grows, there's a unique opportunity to shape it in a way that prioritizes environmental responsibility. With the global demand for cannabis products skyrocketing, farmers and companies are increasingly focusing on sustainable practices, from eco-friendly cultivation methods to biodegradable packaging. Cannabis could become a beacon of environmentally conscious agriculture, leading the way in regenerative farming and sustainable business practices. The rise of cannabis could be just the beginning of a larger movement toward more sustainable industries across the board. Yet, as we look to the future, it's important to remember the lessons of the past. Cannabis's journey has been a roller coaster, and its legacy must include the lessons learned from decades of prohibition, criminalization, and inequality. As we move forward, it's essential to ensure that the benefits of cannabis legalization are distributed fairly. This includes addressing the harm done to communities disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, particularly communities of color. Social equity programs, expungement of criminal records, and reinvestment in affected communities are crucial steps toward creating a more just and inclusive cannabis industry. Historians still argue whether cannabis will continue to break through cultural, economic, and legal barriers, or whether it will face new challenges as it reaches its full potential. Some believe that cannabis will eventually be embraced globally as a part of everyday life, while others caution that new hurdles, whether political, legal, or social, may emerge as cannabis becomes even more mainstream. One thing is certain, though, the story of cannabis is far from over, and the legacy it leaves behind will shape the future in ways we can't yet fully predict. As you settle into the calm reflection of the journey we've taken together, consider how far cannabis has come. From its earliest use in ancient rituals to its role in today's global economy, from being a taboo substance to becoming a wellness icon, cannabis has not only survived but thrived. It's a testament to the resilience of the plant and to the enduring desire for freedom, healing, and personal empowerment. In closing, as you drift into the gentle quiet of the night, think about how this journey will continue, how cannabis will shape the generations to come. Its future is still being written, but one thing is clear: cannabis will be a part of our story, now and always. As you let the soft sounds of the world around you settle into a peaceful rhythm, remember this: the story of cannabis is far from over. And as the world continues to evolve, we'll keep watching its journey, with hope for a future that embraces the plant for all that it offers. Now let the darkness wrap you in calm, and as you slip into the quiet, know that the world of cannabis is just getting started.